or football in America?
I think that it doesn't get that much coverage, partly because in the developing youth soccer is really geared towards college and university soccer. And so when people think about like development and soccer, developing soccer talent in the U.S., they think about, okay, well, you want to, try and go to the best university in terms of soccer and get scholarships and that sort of thing. So, we don't have non-league soccer is not as big here as it is over there, right? So there isn't as much of that kind of alternative sort of non-academic, if you will, development pathway. So it's not emphasized. You don't hear a lot about it.
Yeah, you don't really get kind of local community like maybe not even teams, but just kind of groups for young kids to kind of play the sport. That's still not kind of there yet.
Even stuff like, sorry, before to jump in, but even stuff like juniors and amateurs, I don't really think they've got that in America.
No, but I wouldn't imagine there would be so much of like a kind of competitive, this team playing this team, but even just like kids being able to go and access sport and play the sport like on a weekend. I just wonder, is that the case, or is that kind of still got to really happen?
I think there's definitely a lot of youth soccer that goes on, but it's not as well organized, and it's not focused so much on developing talent. That's kind of the way I would think about it. It's more of like something that you do on the weekend with your kids so that they're not getting into trouble. It's not really designed to develop, talent in the way that is typical of other youth and amateur soccer, football in other parts of the world.
And Chris had touched upon earlier that your site is very stat-based. You yourself had just mentioned that you'd maybe watched NFL previous to becoming interested in football. Is that something that you've kind of taken the kind of NFL level stats, and have you applied that to soccer, Seth?
Well, I do stats basically for my job, so it's kind of bringing in, marrying the two worlds together of my love of sports and also my work. So I get to bring the two together. I had never really thought about applying stats to understanding sports until I started. Actually, I read this book called The Numbers Game. I don't know if you guys have read that one. Yeah, it's I guess the subtitle is like, everything you ever knew about soccer is wrong or something like that. And I read the book, and I really got interested in trying to basically, for me, like, get more out of the game. Like, I don't want it to end. I mean, you guys feel the same way, I'm sure. I don't want it to end when the whistle blows after 90 minutes. Like, I want to continue thinking about football and talking to people about football and just, make it like a all-encompassing, like 100% part of my life, And I never felt that way about any other sport that I followed. And so it's kind of a funny thing. Like, I used to watch every kind of sport there was. Now I only watch football, and basically devote almost 100% of my spare time to it, either by watching it or reading about it or analyzing data and that sort of thing.
Great stuff.
And just going back to the stats, and I've seen pieces that you've shared and whatnot, but what stats do you think are most important when you're looking at football and analysing it? What do you think are the kind of key stats?
Well, it all comes down to what the player and the manager control. And depending on what kind of a stat you're talking about, there's going to be different levels of influence, right, in terms of what they can control. The thing that is probably most important is shots, right? Because the shot, you can really, that's the most control that a player can exert on the pitch, on the game. can they take a shot, and can they get the shot on target? That's where the skill component comes in, right? Whether or not that shot actually turns into a goal, it's not. And a lot of times, it's not up to the player, right? You've got a goalkeeper there, and so once you bring the goalkeeper into the equation, then it starts getting more complicated, and the player starts to lose control of that aspect of the game. So to judge a player, on goals, or to judge a team on goals, can be deceptive because it's not completely under the control of the player or certainly not the manager, even though the manager typically gets this, the sack when the team isn't scoring enough goals, right? But shots are the most important thing.
And so thinking about this season, have you done any analysis of Celtic and Ronnie's run so far, and how do you think it's going?
I think that it's going very well. In terms of the stats that matter most, as I just mentioned, shots and shots on target ratio, his start is up there with some of the better starts of a first-time manager since Martin O'Neill. And one of the things that Celtic is doing very well is they're taking a lot of shots. They have taken the most shots so far through 13 games of any Celtic team going back to 2000. What they're not doing well is getting those shots on target. So the shooting accuracy is actually relatively low. And so that opens the question of is that down to the manager or down to the players? They're taking a lot of shots because the pace of the game is quicker than it typically has been in recent history. The idea that high pressing, very almost like frenetic style of play, it results in a lot of shots, which is a good thing. But we need to figure out a way to get more of those shots on target. And if we do that, we'll really blow away, the rest of the league. Right now, we're doing pretty well as it is, but it's scary to think that our shooting accuracy could get better.
Seth, in terms of using statistics to analyse the game, there are, as I'm sure you'll have encountered them, there are a lot of dissenters who don't believe that they can adequately reflect what the game that's been on in front of them. Has there ever been a time, do you kind of put a lot of faith in their accuracy, or have you ever watched a game, looked at the stats and thought that really doesn't reflect what I've just seen there?
Yeah, I mean that's an excellent question, and it's something that I've thought a lot about. People talk about the eye test, right? Which is like, what do you see, when you watch it, and you compare that to the stats. And if you don't like what you're seeing on the field, the stats, for some people, the stats don't matter. It doesn't matter how many shots you're taking or how many are going on target. How good are this season versus previous years? If people don't like what they're seeing on the field, it's like they don't believe the stats. And I can appreciate that. I don't feel like, one is a better approach than the other. If you're just looking at the stats, you're definitely missing a lot. You're missing a lot. But the problem with the eye test for me is, especially if you're a Celtic supporter, you have emotions that are built into your judgments about how the team are playing. And the nice thing about the stats is they force you to and kind of look at things objectively without the emotional component, because emotions really cloud the picture, right? So we can play poorly, as we have done in the Europa League, and people will get all pumped up, about the wins and the draws away to Salzburg, etc. And then we'll play very well, right? In the game against Hamilton, we dominated, or even a better example is the Motherwell draw this season. We dominated that game, right? Over 90% shots on target ratio. Totally dominated, ended in a draw. People want the manager sacked. it's the emotional side, I think, that we have to try and keep in check, regardless of whether we're focusing on stats or focusing on what we see on the field.
I think that's quite a good way of looking at it in terms of the emotion when you're watching a football match, especially if it's a team that you support. I can totally see how any sort of basis in reality at times can go out the window due to your anger. So I think that's quite a good way of looking at it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because obviously stats are... Actually, let me ask the question. Stats are quite a big part of, obviously, American sports. Obviously here, would you guys agree that people are not willing to take stats on board?
I think at times people will use them, but I don't think they've got the widespread acceptance that perhaps they might do in America.
Yeah, absolutely. Seth, who outside of... actually, I'll ask you this. Who's been the most impressive team in Scotland, stats-wise?
Hamilton, without a doubt. I mean, they went on an excellent run at the start of the season, and with the clean sheets and their striking abilities are tremendous. They have really high shot accuracy, almost like 50% of their shots go on target, whereas Celtic is like down closer to 30%. And so they've been really impressive. The thing is that what you start to worry about is how sustainable is that. And what we saw with Hamilton is that in the end they did come back to earth, and they're now back on track again after a very nice win this weekend. But they won against one of the worst teams, so I wouldn't get too excited about it. But I would say Hamilton's been very impressive, and definitely for me, Hamilton and Celtic are the two most impressive teams this season so far in terms of statistics.
So then on the opposite side of it, Seth, who would you say is the worst statistically?
St. Mirren is really bad. And I've been kind of trying to figure out, is this bad luck or is it really a bad team? Because they're kind of hovering around that 50% mark in terms of shots on target ratio, which suggests a certain amount of skill, right? But their ability, their shot conversion, their ability to actually score goals is so low that it suggests that, in fact, there's something really wrong there, that it's not just bad luck, that there really actually is something wrong, that it's hard to say what exactly it is. But they're doing poorly. On the other team that's obviously doing really poorly, and it's been unfortunate for Stuart McCall, but Motherwell is very poor on the in terms of shots, right? Both in terms of the total shots ratio and shots on target ratio. They're the worst. They're the absolute worst. And that's something that you don't expect to get better, unfortunately. I think that Motherwell is interesting in that they probably have been overperforming in recent years because of the manager. He's been able to get more out of those players than probably what they really deserve or could obtain otherwise. And it's just, he lost the plot this season, and they basically have returned to what's probably their real level, and it's not looking pretty.
Seth, I was just going to ask, obviously we're kind of getting to the end of the year and the January transfer window will be approaching soon. Is there any kind of obvious area that kind of a statistical analysis is kind of shown that we have to improve in? Is there any area where you think, looking at the stats, if we could maybe bring in this type of player to do this job, he could then affect the kind of overall picture in a certain way? The reason I ask, we were speaking before about kind of maybe having a player that sits in front of the defence, and I know you had said that the defence are actually quite good. it maybe from a statistical point of view that's not needed, but maybe us just watching the game we think it is. Is there anything that you would think?
Yeah, I mean, the defense is what